Let's talk about bugs. Today I'm going to be going over all the different bugs that you can feed to your chameleon and ranking them, giving them a score, and going through all the pros and cons because not all bugs are created equal. So without further ado, let's get into the video. If you're wondering where I am, I'm just on the other side of my reptile room. So all the enclosures are over there and this cute little hexagon wall is on the other side. I made a video previously 4 years ago, back when I was just getting started on YouTube, ranking all the different bugs based off of nutrition, cost, yumminess, all these different factors, giving them different scores. And since then, I've learned a lot about bugs and I want to throw in some different bugs and go into a little more detail, talking about shelf life, cost of the bugs, all that good stuff. So we're gonna start out with my personal favorite bug and your guys' as well, because I asked on Instagram. Top choice are Dubia roaches. Now, there are a lot of pros and there are some cons, so let's talk about it. Some of the pros of Dubia roaches is that they have minimal smell and noise. Now this is a big deal, especially when we talk about crickets as compared to roaches. Roaches are not very smelly. They do have a very faint smell. I don't personally notice it. I also keep my roaches and reptiles in a room separate for me, but when I did keep my chameleons in my living room, I just kept the roaches in kind of a storage container underneath their enclosures. Never noticed it. As far as noise, the only noise that I hear with Dubia roaches are the little feet climbing on things like the egg crates and like plastic, which can kind of be creepy, but again, not something that's gonna like wake you up or you're gonna hear across the room just when you're next to them. Would you hear that? The other perk with Dubia roaches is that they come in a variety of sizes. So you can get teeny tiny nymphs that are itty bitty, and you can get like full grown adult Dubia roaches. So this is fabulous because then you can feed these for your baby, juvenile, and adult chameleons. My adult chameleons usually eat 3/4 of an inch to an inch, and then you can kind of work your way down from those sizes. You want to make sure that the bug size that you pick is no wider than the width between your chameleon eyes so we avoid any sort of choking hazard. The other big perk of Dubia roaches is their nutrition. So they are 23% protein and 7% fat. I'm getting all these percentages and stuff either off of the Dubia.com or Josh's Frogs website, so feel free to check those out if you want more information on nutrition. Point being, high in protein, low in fat, making them a great choice. They're also really great for gut loading, which is the process of feeding the roaches fresh fruits and vegetables so that their bellies are full of all these micronutrients that will be passed on to your chameleon. And supplementation is when we put those powders on top of the bugs, again, before we feed them to our chameleon. And I have videos separately just on those two topics, so feel free to check those out if you want to learn more. Some bugs are easier to gut load with supplement than others, and Dubias are one of the easy ones. Another cool thing about Dubia roaches is that they live forever. Not literally, but a very long time. They'll live over a year, I believe. I've never actually had some long enough to live over a year, but I've definitely had some for 6 months because Neptune, when he was younger, decided I don't want to eat Dubia roaches, so I hung on to them because I didn't have any other reptiles at the time, and they lived for a very long time. So as compared to other bugs that we can feed to our chameleons, Dubias have a very long shelf life, which means you can buy hundreds at a time, keep them alive, and feed them to your chameleon. The perk of also buying them hundreds at a time is that you can get more bang for your buck. So I think it's about $25 for 100 Dubia roaches, which is not the cheapest bug you can get, but definitely on the cheaper side. So I think that's another pro of Dubia roaches. And the last pro of Dubia roaches is that they will stay in a cup. So with cup feeding, something like a cricket would pop out, hornworms can get big, those can climb out, but Dubia roaches will stay in a cup because they can't climb smooth surfaces, again, making them a good option. But if we move into the cons list, the downside of Dubia roaches is that they don't move much. So I'm gonna put that as a con because chameleons are attracted to movements and they're more attracted to bugs that move around a lot. So if your Dubia roaches just go and hide in a corner and don't really move around, then your chameleon may not be interested. Which leads me to another con, is that not every chameleon will eat Dubia roaches, to the point where I made an entire video just on tips for feeding Dubia roaches to your chameleons because so many people have such a difficult time. All of my chameleons will eat Dubia roaches no problem, so it's definitely possible. Lots of people feed Dubia roaches to their chameleons, but there are a couple of things you can try, so I'd suggest checking out that video if you haven't already. The other con with Dubia roaches is that they can be illegal. So in places like Florida and Canada, it is illegal to purchase Dubia roaches. So some other options, other alternatives could be things like discoid roaches, red runners, orange heads. I think there's something called banana roaches. There are other legal roach species, but Dubias are illegal. All that being said, I'm gonna give Dubia roaches a 9 out of 10. It would be a 10 out of 10 if more chameleons ate them right away, but they are a little tricky and not every chameleon likes Dubia roaches, and they are illegal in some places, so I feel like for that I should ding them a point. So 9 out of 10 for Dubia roaches. And speaking of roaches, I briefly just want to touch on discoid roaches. Now, I personally don't have any experience with discoid roaches. It was already hard enough for me to get over feeding Dubia roaches to my chameleon, so I'm not really tempted to want to bring in another roach species into my home, but discoid roaches can be a great option, and so those I would also give a 9 out of 10. They can't climb smooth surfaces, you can breed your own colony. Also great for gut loaded and supplementing. They are pricier than Dubia roaches. You can get about 25 for $25, so that can be a con because they're a little more expensive. And they're not as commonly available as Dubia roaches, but other than that, they are an excellent feeder. And I briefly want to mention that if you're looking at different places to get bugs, or maybe you're hearing some bugs you've never even heard of, all these bugs are available on either Dubia.com or Josh's Frogs. Those are both two places I have an affiliate link. They are not discount links. Wait, just kidding. Dubia has a discount link. So actually with my Dubia link, you can get 15% off your order. Love that. But they don't have some of these bugs we're going to be talking about. They have a lot of them, but not all of them. Josh's Frogs has all these bugs that we're talking about, and I do have an affiliate link with that. So again, there's no discount through that, but I do get a little kickback, and that's available through my website, and I'll link it down in the description box of the video. So if you do decide to shop through that link, thank you so much in advance. Now let's talk about crickets. So crickets are available at Josh's Frogs, but not Dubia, because they do Dubia roaches, but crickets are probably the next most popular bug. I'm gonna give them an 8 out of 10, and let's talk about why. First pro about crickets is that they're cheap. You can get 1,000 crickets for $20. What? So cheap. That's like dirt cheap. Maybe we should say cricket cheap instead of dirt cheap. They are so incredibly cheap. That makes them a great feeder. But it's not just about cost, we also gotta talk about nutrition. So crickets have 17% protein, 8% fat, so a little bit less than Dubia roaches, but still a great protein to fat ratio. They're also easy to gut load, also easy to supplement, and they have lots of movement because they're bouncing all over the place, which makes them very attractive and a very popular feeder that lots of chameleons enjoy. The movement of crickets can be both a pro and a con. Pro because they're gonna be very attractive to your chameleon and they're gonna be so excited to hunt down this jumpy bug. But it means that the bugs won't stay in a cup, making them very challenging to keep track of how many your chameleon is eating, if they're staying gut loaded, supplement, all that good stuff. So depending on how that is for your chameleon, it can be a pro or a con. The other cons for crickets can be that they are noisy, smelly, they can die easily, meaning that they have a short lifespan. I don't personally feed my chameleon crickets for all those reasons, plus I feed them a variety of other bugs and use Dubia roaches as my #1 feeder. But from what I've heard from other keepers, the smelly and easily dying and all that good stuff can be mitigated if you keep your crickets nice and clean. So feel free to look up different tips and tricks on how to do that. All that being said, I'm going to give crickets an 8 out of 10. They're an excellent feeder and something that I highly recommend feeding to your chameleon. And then one honorable mention for my friends overseas, locusts are very popular, so I don't have any personal experience with locusts, but I expect that they're very similar to crickets. I've heard that they're a great feeder, people love them, their nutrition is great, so feel free to check those out if you have them in your area. Now we're moving on to worms. Although this next bug technically isn't a worm, it's a larvae of a beetle. We're talking about superworms. So the pros of superworms is that they're high in protein. They have almost 20% protein, 19.7% according to the website that I looked at, and they have a very long shelf life. Eventually, superworms will turn into beetles. People have asked me, can I feed my chameleons the beetles? Technically, yes. I've heard that, I've never done it, but I've heard that chameleons don't like them. I don't know, so feel free to look into that, but they are safe. You technically can do it. I just choose not to do, I don't usually get beetles anyways because I feed all the worms before they can even turn into beetles, but the superworms will last for months if taken care of properly. They're also very easy to gut load and supplement. Superworms are one of my personal favorites for treat bugs, but moving into the con section, they can be addictive. Not literally, but chameleons will get hooked on superworms to the point where they will only eat superworms and will refuse all other bugs, this can be stressful because superworms are a treat bug. They also have a high percentage of fat. Superworms have 17.7% fat, which is a pretty high percentage considering that roaches and crickets have around 7%. So that is also another con and why they're considered a treat bug and not something we'd want our chameleons to be feeding often. Now, the thing with all these things as we start working our way into treat bugs is that variety is key. We don't want to feed our chameleons just one type of bug, just crickets, just roaches, just superworms. It's all about variety and having good ratios of treat bugs versus what we consider staple bugs or healthier bugs. All that being said, I'm going to be giving superworms a 7 out of 10. You can get them for a good price, long shelf life, great treat bug. We just got to be careful not to overfeed them, and we got to be careful that our chameleons don't get addicted. Moving right along, we've got waxworms next. Waxworms are great because they're nice and small, so you can feed them to babies, juveniles, and adult chameleons. They will also stay in a cup and they will also hatch into moths, so you can actually feed them the wax moths. Some of the cons though is that they don't have as long of a shelf life. I would say waxworms last about 2 weeks before they'll start to pupate, which is when they go into their little cocoon and hatch into moths. Waxworms are also high in fat, which is a con and why they're also considered a treat bug. They have 24.9% fat and about 14% protein. All that being said, I'm going to give waxworms a 6 out of 10. The next worm I want to talk about are called black soldier fly larvae, commonly referred to as BSFL. They're also known as nutrigrubs, phoenix worms, and calciworms. All the same bug, just different name. These are very, very popular because they're super high in calcium. Their calcium to phosphorus ratio is actually where it needs to be, so a lot of keepers choose not to supplement their black soldier fly larvae. I personally do because it's very rare that I only feed black soldier fly larvae. I usually throw in a couple of different bugs at the same time, so I just throw in my appropriate calcium or multivitamin powders in there, dust them, and then feed them to my chameleons. But if you choose not to, that's an option. They are also a great size. They come in a variety of sizes, like small to large. I always feed the largest. The largest are still teeny tiny, so you could even feed the largest to your baby chameleons, your juvenile chameleons, and they'd be totally fine. The larvae last about 2 weeks as well before they'll start to pupate and hatch into the flies. The flies are a great option, one of my favorite pros of feeding them because they can provide enrichment for your chameleons. Now, I'm not sure what the nutrition of the flies themselves is, and I'm definitely not trying to gut load or supplement them, but it's super fun to watch my chameleons hunt down and snipe a black soldier fly out of the air. The other thing with black soldier fly larvae is they're relatively cheap. You can get about 100 of them for under $5. I think that is a great deal. Now they are smaller, so you're gonna be feeding more of those. Like one black soldier fly larva is not equal to one Dubia roach, but I do think they're a really great price point for their shelf life, nutrition, and everything else that comes with them. Now let's talk about some of the cons. We already said that they don't have a super long shelf life, about 2 weeks, which is less than something like a superworm or a Dubia roach. The other cons is that they can climb smooth surfaces when they get wet. Now, if you leave them dry in a cup, they will stay in there, no problem. But if your mister goes off and they get wet, they can then climb smooth surfaces and they can climb out of their cups and be in your enclosures. Now, that's not a terrible thing. I have found a black soldier fly larvae on my floor before. That was kind of creepy, but they will eventually burrow into the soil and pupate and hatch into a fly, so I don't think that's the most terrible of things, but I just wanted to put it out there. And the last con, sometimes black soldier fly larvae aren't always digested. When you look at your chameleon's poop, there's sometimes a larvae that's out on the other side. So just something to keep in mind, something to keep an eye on. If your chameleon is having a difficult time digesting their bugs just in general, then you want to make sure that your care, especially your heat, your temperatures, your UVB, your supplements, all that good stuff is where it needs to be. And to touch on the nutrition of the black soldier fly larvae, they have a 17.5% protein and 14% fat. So a little bit higher fat percentage than some of the exoskeleton Dubia roaches and crickets, but still a lower fat percentage than the waxworms. So overall, I'm gonna give black soldier fly larvae a 9 out of 10. Next up, we've got silkworms. Now these are becoming more and more popular amongst the reptile hobby, and it's been really great to see because the last time I made this video, silkworms were few and far between, and we're now seeing more and more people start to offer them. Silkworms have a very high protein, especially for being a worm, so they have great nutrition. I was unable to find the percentage of the protein and fat on the websites I was looking at, but I'm sure it's out there if you want to check it out. I just know they have great nutrition. They will also hatch into moths, and you can feed those to your chameleons. Speaking of digestion, we had talked about black soldier fly larvae sometimes being difficult to digest. The silkworms are very easy to digest. They're also pretty easy to care for. They have minimal poop, they're easy to store, they don't have any sort of smell, and they're much easier to care for compared to something like a hornworm, which we'll talk about later on. The cons of the silkworm is that they can be a little more expensive and a little more difficult to come by. The current pricing that I'm seeing for silkworms is about $25 for 50, I think it was like the medium size, and there's not many places that are carrying silkworms. I do have some affiliate links that do offer silkworms, so if you're interested in those, feel free to check them out on my website, and those links will point you in the right direction. But overall, silkworms are a great option, and I'm gonna be giving them a 9 out of 10. We've got 2 more worms to go. Next up, we've got hornworms, a classic. These are very popular and very yummy amongst reptiles, especially chameleons. Now, I do know of a couple chameleons who don't like hornworms, or people who have fed a hornworm that was too big to their baby chameleon, kind of spooked them. But generally speaking, hornworms are very popular. They are considered a tree bug and not something that we would feed all the time. They have high levels of moisture and water content, so they can be really great for hydrating. You can cup feed them, but I would just make sure that your cup is deep enough, because I have had some pretty hefty hornworms just climb up and over the cup because they were so big. But generally speaking, as long as they're not taller than the height of the cup, they'll stay in there just fine. And another cool thing with the hornworms is that you can hatch them into hawk moths. Hawk moths are a little more difficult to hatch than, say, like a black soldier fly larvae or a wax moth, or even a silk moth. So feel free to do a little bit of research. You kind of have to put them in some substrate. You could put them probably into your enclosures and they would hatch out of there. I just have had such difficulty getting them to hatch out with their wings not being slightly deformed. That might be a me thing, but feel free to check that out. Now let's talk about the cons. This is where hornworms lose quite a few points. They are expensive, okay? If you go to like Petco or PetSmart, you're paying like $5 for one worm, which is absolutely insane, and no one should be paying that price. Please, please, please do not pay that. Don't do it. You can instead buy your bugs online, including your hornworms, which will be much cheaper. That being said, it's about $5.50 currently for 12 mediums, so that's not a great price compared to the other bugs, but hey, it's a tree bug. You don't have to get them all the time. Hornworms can also grow incredibly fast, within days, so their shelf life is a matter of like a week before they're gonna get way too big to feed to your chameleon. And for this reason, I don't recommend feeding them to your chameleon unless your chameleon is at least 6 months old, because the worms are just gonna get way too big, way too fast. Also, can we just talk about hornworm poop for a second? So if you didn't know, you're supposed to store your hornworm container upside down so that the lid is actually on the bottom and the food is at the top. This so the poop will fall down, and then you can open the lid and the poop will fall out. It's still so incredibly messy to deal with hornworm poop, and they're just pooping so much because they're growing so fast. So I'm also gonna dock them some points just because of the messiness. Pro tip though, if you run out of hornworm food, you can just feed them carrots. Their poop will turn orange, but it will get you over, a couple of extra days if you need to. And the last thing I want to mention as a con of hornworms is that they are illegal in the UK. So if you're looking for them in your area in the UK and you're not finding them, that's likely why. A silkworm would be a close second because it's also a soft-bodied, larger worm, but silkworms will have more nutrition than the hornworms do. That being said, I'm going to give hornworms a 6 out of 10 for their ranking. The last worm we're going to talk about is probably the most popular worm you can possibly get, mealworms. That makes them easily available. You can find them at any reptile shop, Petco, PetSmart. You can find them anywhere. Unfortunately, they are not a great bug. They are considered a treat bug, but they have, 19% protein and then 13% fat. Oh, I nailed it. I have notes over there. And so they do have high levels of protein, but a good considerable amount of fat. But the thing with mealworms is that they have high levels of chitin. And so we want to avoid that. There are rumors that mealworms will eat through your reptiles. That is a total myth, not something to worry about. Everything in moderation. If you do decide to put mealworms into your diet, nothing wrong with that. We just want to avoid feeding exclusively mealworms, just like how we want to avoid feeding exclusively superworms, waxworms, hornworms, any sort of those treat bugs. We got to add them in as variety. I personally don't choose to feed my chameleons mealworms because I think there's tons of other great bugs that I can feed to them instead, other treat bugs, and I just choose not to feed mealworms, but they're totally a treat bug option. I just want you to be thoughtful and considerate of the nutrition and everything else that goes with them. One other pro though for mealworms is that they are super cheap. When I was looking around online, you could get 100 mealworms for $3. Black soldier fly larvae, I think it was like 100 for like $4 or $5. So the worms are definitely can be a good bang for your buck option, especially when you're not getting hornworms, because those are expensive. So that being said, I'm gonna give mealworms a 4 out of 10 as a feeder option. Now, all these rankings are very subjective. They are 100% subjective. They're just my opinion based off of my experience and observations with bugs. The gist of it is make sure that you feed your chameleons a variety of bugs. One thing I just wanted to touch on is flies. We briefly touched about black soldier fly larvae, but you could also feed blue bottle flies or green bottle flies to your chameleons. Those are great enrichment. Again, I don't know the nutrition of flies. I don't feed them for the value of the nutrition. I feed them as an enrichment opportunity, something fun for my chameleon to do. So there you guys have it. We talked a lot about bugs, went over nutrition, shelf life, the cost of them. The gist of it is though, feed your chameleon a variety, be thoughtful and considerate, and do your best. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Leave any questions or comments down below. Feel free to subscribe so you know when I post a new video. Be sure to check out my playlist, my bug playlist. I have videos just on a hornworm Q&A, Dubia roach Q&A. I did a video ranking the bugs on smelliness, so if you haven't already, check that out. Feel free to follow Neptune and all my commands on social media at Neptune the Chameleon. Check out my website, neptunethechameleon.com. And thank you in advance to anyone who chooses to shop through my affiliate links. Much appreciated. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye! So places like Florida and Canada, that being said, I'm going to be going to give